Now it's time for our second session, Nation Building and Economic Reconciliation. Here, panelists will discuss the history of our regions, how they define economic reconciliation, how their communities work towards reconciliation, and promising practices with Indigenous partners. Our moderator is Prairie Rivers Reconciliation Committee's very own Kristen Johannesson with SREDA.
Yes. Kristen Johannesson was born and raised in Saskatoon and attended the University of Saskatchewan. She graduated with a Bachelor of Arts in Regional and Urban Planning. In 2017, she joined the Saskatchewan Regional Economic Development Authority, SREDA, to help build a regional planning pillar. Kristen has led and developed many new programs supporting regional collaboration, Indigenous economic development, entrepreneurship, and business expansion and attraction. Kristen is a member of the Prairie Rivers Reconciliation Committee and the Reconciliation Saskatoon Committee. She runs the PRRC Facebook, Instagram pages, so remember, give them a follow if you haven't already. Hello to Kristen.
Awesome. Can you hear me now?
We hear you, we just can't see you. Beautiful.
I know, I don't know what is up with my camera, but it's not letting me share. It says cannot start video. So you just get to look at my beautiful face, my beautiful picture. Oh, there we go. Let's see if that works. No, still doesn't work. So you just get to look at my beautiful picture and hear my wonderful voice speaking to you. It's like something from above. So I just want to say thank you for the introduction to both of you, Tracy and Trisha. And thanks to the elder for the prayers and opening in the conference this morning and opening it in a good way. I feel very honored to be a part of this conference and to be moderating this panel. We have heard from so many knowledgeable people over the past few days, and we have 2 more panels full of excellent leaders lined up for you today. And in this session, I'll be moderating this and we'll be discussing nation building and economic reconciliation. And with me, I have Reeve Judy Harwood, Mayor Ryan White, and Milton Tootoosis, who will share their perspectives and experiences. Before we get to the topic, I would like to just introduce everyone with me today and share a bit about their life journey and how they got to where they are today. I encourage you to listen intently to those bios as they give you a glimpse into a person's journey. And there's so much that we can learn and appreciate about people once we get to know them more. We'll start off with Ryan. Ryan White was born and raised in Prince Albert and moved to his now hometown, Aberdeen, in 2007. Ryan White is a community leader and he has exemplified this important job through numerous roles he has taken on during his life. For the past 16 years, Ryan has been serving the Saskatoon community as a member of the Saskatoon Police Service. On top of this, he is the mayor of Aberdeen and has served as councillor and deputy mayor for his community for a number of years prior to being elected as mayor. In addition to his mayoral and constable roles, Ryan also serves his local community as a volunteer firefighter and first responder. I'm exhausted just thinking about what his day looks like. And when he has free time, which it doesn't sound like much, he loves to spend it outdoors, hunting, canoeing, backpacking, and just enjoying beautiful Mother Nature. The next community leader we have is Milton Tootoosis in the middle of your screen. And he is one of my colleagues at SREDA, who I'm so thankful to be learning from and working with every day. Milton was raised on Poundmaker Indian Reserve near the Battlefords in the ancestral territory of the Cree, Assiniboine, and Saulteaux nations. His ancestors were once called the River People before they were labeled Indians by the colonial system. They were innovators, hunters, gatherers, and traders using the river system as their superhighway or their internet of the day. They lived off the land and considered themselves to be part of the land, not exploiters of it, taking only what they needed for their sustenance. I loved how Milton put this into his bio so we can see the full history of who he is as a person. Milton also has a long list of experience in leadership, governance, human resources, and has a wealth of knowledge to share. He's been a human resource practitioner for over 40 years, a community economic developer, a trustee for his nation, has served as headman for his community, so much more. In addition to all this, can you believe there's even more? Milton is the founder and chair of the Saskatchewan Indigenous Economic Development Network and is a director for the Indigenous Leadership Development Institute, which are the founders of the World Indigenous Business Forum. So if you haven't already noticed, I think that we can all see that Milton has been living and promoting this reconciliation before it even became a thing. And third, on my left side, might be different on your screen, we have our community leader, Judy Harwood. So Judy is a role model for women in governance and those looking to become amazing leaders in their community. Judy is well known for her role as the Reeve of RM of Corman Park, where she has served and represented her community for 9 years. In addition to this, she was a counselor on the RM of Corman Park Council for 6 years. She has tirelessly worked to make her community welcome to people and businesses of all types, which I think could be attributed to her experience in the hotel management industry. I do hold a special spot in my heart for Judy, as she was such a wonderful person to my late grandfather, who she met during these days. Over the course of her career, she has taken time to share her experience by serving on several boards, including SaskTel, Saskatchewan Transportation Corporation, Prairie, Ronald McDonald House, SREDA, whoop whoop, NSBA, Saskatoon Community Foundation, and much more. Judy was recognized for her leadership, relationship building, and many other accomplishments when she received the Queen's Jubilee Medal for Outstanding Community Service, and when she was named Saskatchewan's 10 Most Influential Women. As you can see, we have a panel full of experienced, knowledgeable, and wonderful community leaders, and I'm so thankful that you're here to listen to their life journeys with me. And now we are here to start the panel. So Milton, would you mind kicking us off by sharing what nation building is?
Absolutely. Thanks for that kind introduction. And first of all, I want to say Tanse Tawao, Kitatamskat na all my relations. I welcome you to this space. First, I want to start by introducing my spirit name, and it's Kasketeo Masqua in Sigason. That means black bear in my language. And it's part of the, I guess, decolonization process and experience that I'm going through as well. And I'll explain more of that later here in my short presentation and subsequent workshops that I will be hosting for not only SREDA, but for the SREDA members. But first of all, I want to start by saying, giving a land acknowledgement or addressing the land acknowledgement issue. A lot of times we hear at conferences and some mayors, sometimes politicians, and typically non-Indigenous, a little uncomfortable and feeling forced to even say it. But I want to be clear and let people know that it's not quite accurate sometimes to say that welcome just to Treaty 6 territory. It's like life started in this territory in 1876. The truth of the matter is it started way before that. And you just have to go to Wanuskewin to find proof and evidence that my ancestors have been here for approximately 11,000 years. They also had a supply chain, their own Indigenous supply chain, if you will, even before the Hudson Bay Company arrived. In our culture, we have this term, and it's applicable to all tribal languages. We have a term called Pimatsuin, which means life, and Pimatisuin, which means taking care of oneself. And our ancestors indeed, prior to Treaty 6 and prior to the arrival of non-Indigenous peoples, were taking care of themselves for a long, long time. And so the vision the elders had back in 1876 at Fort Carleton was indeed one of a restart, a new livelihood when they were negotiating Treaty 6 at Fort Carleton. That's just over 130 years ago. They made a handshake. They actually, they say that Indians, the chiefs signed a nex on a document. Some say they didn't. But the legal interpretation has been taken by Canada's lawyers and advisors to the minister, and they just read and follow the written text. But there's actually another version, and it is the Indigenous version, the Nehio version, if you will, in this region. So we had a rocky start, as you know, if you look at the rebellion era in 1885, that's not that long ago, and we've been trying to mend that ever since. To me, what is nation building? Well, first, a little bit of background to set some context from my perspective. First of all, First Nations had conflict and wars with each other, but they eventually did reconcile and they did form political and economic alliances. The Hollywood films have painted this picture that it was just the Indians, the First Nations, causing and creating war. But that wasn't the case, ladies and gentlemen. They were actually defending their territories and their sovereignty. And there's also this romantic image that all tribal nations got along. Nope, they had wars too, nasty ones, but they eventually realized that fighting amongst each other and that the whole divide and conquer idea was not a good one. So they did reconcile and they formed political alliances and economic alliances. To me, nation building is about rebuilding since the damage has been done over the last century because of the Indian Act. It's about rebuilding that damage from the Indian Act, the Indian residential schools, and the oppressive policies such as the pass and permit system. It's about acknowledging that the First Nations did not relinquish their sovereignty over the expediency to open up the land for the railroad and settlement, cheap land, using Dominion Lands Act and the NRTA of 1930 as an example. It's about acknowledging the truth that the poverty and all its symptoms, as mentioned by the speakers before us, is not their own creation or desire when they once owned all the land and its wealth of resources in a different system, a different economic system, outside of the European colonialism and capitalist system that we know now and the private land ownership model. First Nations are now desiring to rebuild wealth, but not at the expense of risking loss of more of their lands or harm to the environment. To me, nation rebuilding is about acknowledging the past harms done to cripple the first economic system on the prairies. It's about rebuilding the economy for a win-win versus a win-lose outcome. And it's about acknowledging not all First Nations are at the same rate of development. And I'll speak to that in a second. And it's about stepping up in a response to the TRC call to action 92, as we are all codependent and striving for economic sovereignty. A note about the Harvard project. I stumbled across this about 2 decades ago. Researchers at Harvard U asked the question, why are some First Nations or tribal nations, as they say in the US, doing well while others are still mired in poverty? Well, they found out that sovereignty matters, institutions matter in terms of laws and policies, culture matters, and leadership matters. And the 3 nations you just heard from, or a cluster of nations, Flying Dust First Nation in the Meadow Lake region, the Muskeg Lakes of the world, the some of the Battle for Tribal Council, BATC, sorry Neil, BATC nations doing really well in terms of trying to rebuild their economies because their political leaders have realized that these 4 elements are critical for economic success, and I believe they apply to municipalities as well. And what is SREDA doing? Am I supposed to get into that yet, or should I stop, Kristen? I forgot the order.
We'll let you stop speaking right now.
I'll take a breath. I'll stop
That was
there.
really good. Thanks for sharing and starting that off.
Okay.
And it's really good to understand why we named the presentation that and get the history behind it. So thank you, Milton.
I just want to say there are different definitions. People understand nation building in different ways, but that is what I've learned in the last couple decades. So thank you.
And like I said before, you are just filled to the brim with knowledge, and I'm sure people will have tons of questions after, and I'll throw some contact information in there. But before we do that, let's head into a few questions. So since you just had the speaker, we'll hand this one off to Judy and Ryan to start off with. So Ryan, do you want to start on this one? We'll go, could you share with the group what economic reconciliation means to you and your community?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first and foremost, just learning what reconciliation itself, means, what I can do personally to learn about what reconciliation is, about the past, listening to the stories, because I think once people in the community can see that, the person that's assigned to lead that community can start learning, acknowledging the past, and not trying to shy away from it or have those uncomfortable discussions, then the community as a whole can kind of get behind it. We've already seen some amazing leadership from, Chief Sutherland and Chief DeLorme, who have just come out and been so open and honest and in speaking to that. And I think they've set some great examples for us. And then from moving on, once we can acknowledge that as leaders and get the community really building in behind that, just learning what we can do in terms of including Indigenous peoples in the future planning of our community. Not just looking, and again, I come from a very small kind of isolated community outside Saskatoon, 700 people, but looking beyond that as a larger community as a whole and seeing what partnerships we can look at in the future. I think there's some amazing synergies that can take place once we kind of get outside that little tiny box that we're used to thinking and moving beyond that. And just, again, a willingness to change how we do things. We've been locked into a certain way of thinking for so long and just doing things in a certain way. And once we open ourselves and our communities to being open to learning and listening to the experiences and stories, then really we can move, hopefully, forward as a larger community and not just, the Aberdeen town or the RM, but just really as this region as a whole, and then start building. Because I really don't think that the strengths that we have will reach their full potential, and this country as a whole won't reach its full potential unless we can all come together and support each other.
That's awesome. Thank you for sharing, Brian. Judy, is there anything you want to build off from there?
Oh, for sure. Well, first of all, Kristen, thank you for the kind introduction. And thank you, Neil, for that compliment to Corman Park. We do have an amazing team here and we look forward to future meetings. But for Corman Park, economic reconciliation means working towards opportunities for shared prosperity for all peoples and reconnecting ourselves with the Indigenous communities. As Reeve, I think reconciliation should begin with increased understanding and a communication to help support improved relationships. In this regard, Corman Park Council and administration are committed to undertaking Indigenous awareness training in 2022. And that's to learn more about First Nations and Métis ways of thinking and being. The pandemic delayed this. This was something that we had planned over 2 years ago to undertake. And certainly now, in recognizing some of the events of this past year, it has increased our mindfulness and responsiveness to these gaps in our organization. Corman Park wants to engage with First Nation communities to discover more about Indigenous business ownership, nation building, and self-governance, and how we as a municipal government can better support these initiatives. We have 12 First Nations with lands in Corman Park, and we want to be respectful for all their opinions on what economic reconciliation means to them and their individual community goals and aspirations. We have to be cognizant that any agreements we make with one may have an unintended impact on another. As a rural municipality with 12 First Nations, 6 urban municipalities, and 9 rural municipalities as neighbors or within our borders, we have many dynamic relationships to consider and the impacts we all have on each other. The First Nations in Corman Park are at various stages in the reserve creation process and have varying levels of development on their lands. Some First Nations have discussed developing their lands as fee simple, and others want to wait until they are transferred to reserve status so they can assume what we hear from one is going to be the same as what we hear from another. For example, Moosomin First Nation leaders sat down with me earlier this year to discuss opportunities to move a Marquis Downs type facility onto their lands along Highway 16. We were very happy to support this initiative and certainly these ongoing conversations. Discussing shared opportunities and challenges with input from First Nation leadership is crucial to respond to the needs and goals of economic reconciliation, not only in Corman Park, but for the region and certainly for the entire province. So Kristen, I know I maybe went on a little bit, and I hope this answered somewhat what our question is, but there's way more to come and I'm excited about the future and working with First Nations community. Thank you.
Exactly. Thanks, Judy. And I appreciate how you mentioned that they're all at varying levels. And I know Milton has spoken on this in the past, just him and I and within our group. But is there anything else that you want to add on to this, Milton?
No, other than each nation is at a different level. You could have two neighboring First Nations and their ideas and thoughts on economic development and partnership could be different, or they could be wide apart. So the cultures within the leadership styles, the visions within each community are quite different. No different than some of your towns. We know some small towns in rural Saskatchewan are dying, while others are thriving. And there's a reason for that. And First Nations, I think, are really not that different. There's also different understanding in terms of what sovereignty. I think they understand what sovereignty means, but in terms of governance, they have different understandings of governance. And you've been oppressed and governed and ruled by the minister and the Indian agents of the world that work for the Ministry of, we still call it Indian Affairs Department. It's a long haul to work your way out of that paradigm and that way of doing business. So you heard this morning, or before us, I should say, those nations have figured it out. They said, we are not going to work and be oppressed by the Minister of Indian Affairs and his or her Indian agents, and we're going to do what we want to do and do it legally, of course. So, anyway, I have more thoughts, but I'll stop there for now.
Yes, I know. You have so many thoughts. You have so much knowledge to share. And just hitting back on a point that Judy had mentioned, I'll let Judy and Ryan and then Milton go, but it's around that, what your community is doing towards reconcili action. So what actions are you taking as a community, as yourself, etc. So Judy, do you want to go off that point that you were mentioning earlier?
I will. I'll be touching on that. There's a couple of more questions we're going to answer, and we're going to talk about meetings that we have set up for better understanding, Kristen. So I will touch on that a little bit later.
Yeah.
But certainly how I'm learning as Reeve and certainly counselors, when we have these meetings with our different bands that come in with potential opportunities, we learn all the time. And again, towards the end of our presentation, I'm going to give a very personal situation that happened to me where it was a huge learning curve for myself, also an embarrassing situation, but I do want to share it because it'll show all of us that we do have to be understanding of each other's culture.
Awesome. Thanks, Judy. Ryan, what is your community doing towards reconcili action?
Yeah, so right now we're really just in the beginning of the learning phases of it. We have some great things going on with the school, and again, just starting right at that ground level in terms of just learning and listening. For myself personally, it was hard because to learn really what reconciliation was, but then to go beyond that and actually listen to some of the stories. And, the U of R has a great book online that you can call Shattering the Silence. And to go through and read those stories, because I didn't fully understand what some of the Indigenous peoples went through and the stories. I mean, we always heard about the residential schools and things, but when this all started coming to light, it was just about really, letting myself hear those stories and then going beyond what I had previously thought or what my previous preconceived notions were. And I think that as a whole, and then the community, there's some really great things going on at our school, some things that we're doing that we can work into our long-term strategic plan. Again, we're not a huge economic driver, in a small town like this, but just doing those basic things that we can do as a small community to expand beyond our borders.
That's awesome. And I love that book that you mentioned, Shattering the Silence. It's a great place to start. And I'm going to post it in the chat so everybody else can see if they haven't already. But thank you for sharing that. Milton, is there anything that you wanted to add from your experience with Lloydminster?
Yeah, I was sharing with the SREDA staff roughly probably 11 years ago. I started this conversation with the city of Lloydminster. It's a small town, small city compared to Saskatoon. But when I approached the city and the chamber and various, business leaders, I experienced some resistance. This is when I was working for the Office of the Treaty Commissioner. I experienced a little bit of resistance, but with ongoing education, building relationships, building trust as to who I was and them building trust in me, that little city 10 years later now has just had its 9th annual Indigenous Economic Partnership Summit. They have a business matchmaking component to that. We've had former Treaty Commissioner Justice Sinclair come speak to the community. We have a new casino, a new Siga casino. The Lake Local College, Lakeland, is taking some action, and they have a Treaty 6 reconciliation committee going. And there must be more going on. I can't keep up, but from where they were 10 years ago to where they are today, they've done 160, and they're starting to produce metrics, and they're starting to track their meetings and outcomes and results. How many contracts, how many people are getting employed, how many subcontractors, etc. So it's not perfect by any means, but you're welcome to learn more about this project by going to economicpartnership.ca.
Awesome. And I can post that in the chat too as well. And that also leads into the question or the topic that we had talked about when we were meeting previously, which was around success stories. What's going on in your community that's been successful around economic reconciliation? Is there anybody that wanted to jump in on that topic right now? I'll open the table to all three of you.
Well, Kristen, I can start if you like.
Sure.
And I would just like to say that since we are early in our journey towards reconciliation, the most important step right now for Corman Park is to learn and to listen, just what Milton is saying, learning and listening. And our approach focuses on hosting gatherings with First Nation chiefs, councillors, and leaders with land holdings in Corman Park. An example of this is Corman Park and our partners in P4G. We're going to be hosting 9 First Nations in the new P4G planning district boundaries for a meeting at Wanuskewin mid-December. And I'm so looking forward to that and sharing ideas. But invitees include chiefs and other reps from Cowessess, English River, Lac La Ronge, Little Pine, Moosomin, Muscoday, Peter Ballantyne, Salto, and Yellow Pine First Nations. Corman Park also believes that developing a framework for a strengthened partnerships between our municipal government and First Nation governments for community economic development and well-being is really important. I know it sounds like lots of words, but we really do need to move forward with understanding. To this end, we have partnered with a number of First Nations to secure provincial funding called the Targeted Sector Support Initiative to undertake joint future growth and servicing studies in higher density, higher priority growth areas of Corman Park. The first growth plan is called the Southeast Concept Plan and involves English River and Cowessess near Highway 11 South and Grasswood area. We are also exploring options for tie-ins to communal septic systems and connections to future Saskatoon Freeway. The second growth study is called the South Corman Park Area Development Plan and includes Fishing Lake and Flying Dust First Nations who have strategic land holdings along Highways 219 and Highway 11 South. These joint studies will encourage intercommunity collaboration, help build capacity, and collectively determine a vision for future growth. And I think working together is going to give us a very solid plan with understanding of what each group is sort of wanting to work towards. We are also actively working on an update to the Corman Park Official Community Plan and Zoning Bylaw. Through this work, our staff have reached out to 3 First Nations, Flying Dust, Fishing Lake, and Mistawasses, who would be impacted by this project. And we wanted to discuss this project means for Corman Park and how would this, by involving First Nations in shaping our community vision and the role we will all play growing together. And I think our administration all really realize it's important to get folks in at the start. Don't bring them in at the end when it's already been decided. We need everyone at the table ahead of time to bring their vision, their ideas, concerns, and work together as a group because it is the future for our area and certainly the future for Corman Park. But we see these 3 First Nations as a really important partner to be at the table right from the start. So thank you for that. I so look forward to the future.
Excellent. I am so excited for the future as well. And if everybody doesn't know, I'm a regional planner, so this is close to my heart, and planning in the region and just anywhere it always just gets me so excited. Ryan, any successful stories around economic reconciliation that you want to share?
Yeah, you know what, right now, just basically since we've joined the PRRC and Tracy's just been an amazing champion, just to see the changing attitudes in our small town and community. I mean, with the stories of the residential schools and the graves came out, the community itself took it upon itself to just go and plant flowers at the school, again, without any urging or anything like that, just as a show of support. You know, they may have not fully understood, what those people were experiencing or what they had gone through, but they just wanted to let them know that, that they weren't alone, and that they wanted to show that this community is trying to learn and trying to change for that support as well. Again, I've been out to the One Arrow First Nations folk and with Chief Sutherland there, just maybe to have some cooperation too between, our fire department and our first responders joint training. Those groups, if we can bring those groups together and get them to see we have so much in common and we can learn so much from each other, that then the community can see and build around that. And again, just the experiences at the school, the way they're talking through things, they do a land acknowledgement during the week. And when they take into account what's being taught, they're mindful of the world views, and they talk about Indigenous beliefs right in the classroom. They talk about, head, heart, the hand, and changing the attitudes there. So we're right at that ground floor kind of thing in terms of the learning and the willingness to learn. And when I hear Milton speak about, Lloydminster and how far they've come, it just really gets me excited to see where our small community can go just through the changing of attitudes and realizing what we can do.
Mm-hmm. And it's really nice to see how it's going. It's teaching that youth. And as you teach your youth, they come home, they teach their parents, they teach their grandparents. And it's just that knowledge through family as well. That's wonderful to see. And thank you for sharing that. Milton, anything?
Hey, quick experience, just piggybacking off Ryan's comments. Judy, when I initiated the idea of an Indigenous Economic Partnership Summit in Lloydminster, the response from the business community was, why should we have an Indigenous event? Why don't they just come to our event? And then I asked them, well, how many brown faces do you see? Hopefully it's not doesn't offend anyone. How many Indigenous people do you see in the audience when you have your chamber events? Well, not many. Well, after our first event, about 6 months later, the first thing that came out of their mouths for our follow-up meeting was, when can we have the next one? We learned so much, right? So they did a 180 just within 6 months there. So that was encouraging. In terms of success stories, some of you may not know, FSIN has been a leader. The Federation of Sovereign Indigenous Nations has been a leader across Canada for quite some time. We've just kind of lost our mojo. We're trying to get it back. But they've been initiators of educational institutions like the First Nations University, SIIT, the Saskatchewan Indigenous Cultural Center. They were the leaders, drivers for the one of the biggest land claim settlement deals. Almost $500 million came back to Saskatchewan and back to real estate here in Saskatchewan. There's been numerous initiatives by business organizations like the Canadian Council for Aboriginal Business, Council for the Advancement of Native Development Officers, which I'm a member of, the World Indigenous Business Forum, Inclusion Works. There's been coalition groups started. I think my good friend Albert DeRocher mentioned that group. They are now talking not only about little gas bars and convenience stores, and those are important and those are profitable, but coalitions of nations, Indigenous nations, are now talking about multi-million and multi-billion-dollar deals. Mm-hmm. Okay, so they're thinking big and outside the box and taking incredible risk, but I think the payoff for those who do win will be tremendous. Of course, we're known for leaders across Canada for basically having a monopoly on gaming, casinos, and now expanding into e-gaming in partnership with the province. There's leaders in energy and so on. So tribal councils, some First Nations, you heard them on the panel previous to this. So there is a lot of movement. It's not all gloom and doom. You will turn on the news and you will hear about social injustice issues and poverty-related issues. You go down 20th Street, you will see a lot of poverty firsthand. And it is indeed quite sad. But on the other hand, there is a silent renaissance, economic renaissance underway, and the media often doesn't write about those good stories. I fortunately get to hear them when we go to our conferences, whether it's local or national or international. We are in a process of working together to strive for $100 billion economy. Right now, a few years ago, there was a survey done. They estimated that the Indigenous economy in Canada was worth around 32 billion. And we're probably already surpassed that, even despite the recession and the pandemic. There has still been business has been still surging and growing, and it's only going to elevate from what I hear. So get a part of it, get a piece of the action, partner with Indigenous nations.
Exactly. And as from a SREDA perspective, we work with a lot of entrepreneurs, and we can see those budding entrepreneurs who are Indigenous, not only in that creative industry, but also budding into the trades industries, the tech industries, etc. So building on our economy, not just in the traditional ways that they did in the past few years, but budding in those other industries. So it's wonderful to see. Thank you for sharing that. Also, something, this might catch you off guard. Sorry. But as we were talking, I was thinking from my ECDEV side, our economy is composed of individuals. Our individuals contribute to the economy through having jobs, through teaching, through learning. And preparing for this presentation as individuals, I know it took a lot of reflection, a lot of thinking back to things that you were learning about economic reconciliation, your journey. And this kind of goes back to what Judy had mentioned before about her learning journey and something that she wanted to share. So Judy, would you be open to sharing what we had talked about before?
Are we talking about the story that I shared where I was so embarrassed? Is that the?
Yes,
okay.
Please.
Okay. And I really just want to preface by saying this is not a negative. I hope no one takes this as a negative. I look at it as a learning experience for Aboriginal, for non-Indigenous and Indigenous folks moving forward. But anyway, a couple of years ago, many years ago, I was invited to attend a powwow. And I was just so happy and so proud to be representing Corman Park. And I was so excited to attend. And I have to say that the entire experience when I was there was very moving. I was very touched by the culture, the traditions. But sadly, I have to say, I did not learn until sometime later that my attire was not appropriate. I should have been wearing a long skirt. Milton said it should have been a ribbon skirt. More to come on that. But I was mortified. I truly was, that I had insulted all in attendance, but more, I was truly embarrassed. I did not know the protocol, and I was not made aware of proper dress ahead of time, and probably my fault. I probably should have done some, maybe Googled or something to find out what would have been appropriate, but I did not. And I want to bring this as an example, even though I truly shudder every time I talk about this, because it shows there's a learning and understanding needed on both sides. I guess we as non-Indigenous can't assume that we know each other. There's things that we don't know, and for me, this was a true learning experience, and one that I am truly embarrassed about. But I hope it's a learning. It was a learning one for me, and there's more, probably examples out there. But I just want to say that on November the 30th this year, I have registered also at the Johnson Shoyama Graduate School for a one-day policy workshop called The Relationship Between Indigenous and Non-Indigenous People. And I'm so looking forward to that. So as much as it was, I'm embarrassed by me, and I hope I truly did not insult anyone with that situation. And I from now on, I'm trying to be very careful without insulting anyone's community. So that's it, Kristen. And I don't know what else to say other than I do apologize.
No, and I'm so glad that you brought that up before and that you're sharing it now, because it's all about learning from one another. We all come from different places. We all have different backgrounds. We didn't know each other, and we've gone through this whole colonialism journey. Not a wonderful thing to go through on either side. And when I think about our economy, economic reconciliation, it all comes down to that relationship building.
Mm-hmm.
We cannot create a relationship. We're not going to have a successful economy. We're not going to have successful businesses. and we're just not gonna be able to work together. It's not gonna work. So I'm glad you shared that. Thank you for sharing that. I hope everybody else on the call appreciates that vulnerability that you had to share. And also on that, I see that we have a comment from Darlene saying, when I bring non-Indigenous to procession at powwow, I give them a heads up of cultural competency learnings for them prior to the event. Wonderful. Thank you for doing that. And if there's others on the call, maybe think about that and think about it from both sides. Just because everybody is different. We don't know, but that's wonderful. So thank you for sharing that, Darlene. Thank you for sharing, Judy. Ryan and Milton, is there anything else you want to add on to that? If not, that's totally fine.
What was the question? Are we talking success and promising practice or just closing comments? Where are we at?
I confused you all because I wanted to hear Judy's story.
Well, actually, Kristen, I had that story tagged on to question number 3, so you're ahead of me on this one too, but I did have it for question 3, so it's all good.
Perfect. Well, maybe let's head into some closing comments. Milton, I know there are some things that you wanted to close off with, so let's head off.
With me?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. No, thank you. I just want to thank Judy and Ryan for sharing this afternoon. And it's indeed humbling to be on a panel like this of people of this stature and experience in a different kind of way. I just wanted to add that I'm encouraging all of the audience, the listeners, and Indigenous and non-Indigenous, that invest more time and capital in your education, your training, technologies, etc., to accelerate sustainable business development in our communities. And I want to add as well, secondly, that I'm asking companies there to rethink their HR attraction policy in particular, and because we need your help to help advance the career development. I don't call them jobs, just jobs. I want to focus on careers, good career development and procurement, because we are working in that space as well. We just had SREDA just hosted with the Saskatchewan Indigenous Economic Development Network, I think a successful Procurement 101 webinar just last week. So we're well on our way to having those deep discussions and advancing in Indigenous procurement protocol that the city of Saskatoon has adopted. And it's something that other communities, municipalities should be looking at as well. And it's not going to happen overnight. A lot of questions, but I believe we've done our homework, and procurement is one way of to create good employment opportunities for our people through the back door, so to speak, if you can't hire them up front, etc. So again, we can have workshops on that and drill down a bit. And lastly is to invest in your own time and your colleagues' time to decolonize ourselves, all of us, including myself, and to eradicate systemic racism. On one hand, we hear great success stories. Yeah, I'm a big fan of that. I'm part of that movement. But I also hear from my community where there's still far too many Indigenous peoples being either unemployed or underemployed, even with degrees and qualifications. So there's something wrong there. It's 2021. I used to work under employment equity policy. Some of you are old enough to remember affirmative action. There was resistance to that terminology back then. We changed the term to representative workforce. And we're still hearing stories of resistance by employers for fears that, due to fears and lack of knowledge and understanding. So again, I just close by saying it's either reconciliation now or the status quo. And you just have to look at the numbers that Dr. Eric Howe, U of S economics professor, published, I think it was about a decade ago. If we don't take action now, we're going to pay a bigger price in the near future, because the Indigenous population is the youngest and fastest growing population in this region.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And what do you always tell us? Ituta?
Ituta and Cree is just do it and hurry up, because we're tired. Our people are getting tired of waiting.
Yes, I hear Kipa a lot in the office. Learning lots of new words. But I just want to say thank you to everybody for being here. I did want to point out one of the wonderful Aberdeen people that we have on our committee, and that's part of the Aberdeen community, Velma. You can't see it today, but my boss gave me a beaded poppy, and it made me think of Velma doing her beading workshop. So wonderful. And then also keep an, yeah, that's exactly what I'm wearing, Milton. Yes. And then also keep an eye out for what's going on in Corman Park around that racetrack up north. And yeah, thank you everybody for your attention today, taking time to learn about everything, taking time to learn about everybody's journey of how they got to this panel. And if you have any questions, I'll post my email. I see there's a question to post Milton's as well. Ryan, Judy, if you feel like you'd like to post your email, feel free to. If not, anybody has questions after the session, feel free to send me an email. We can set up a chat. I'm more than happy to chat. Same with everybody on the on this panel. If there's any other questions, feel free to pipe up. But if not, we had a wonderful time doing this, and thank you, everybody.
Well, Kristen, I just want to say something to Milton. I left my beaded poppy at home, unfortunately, and I received it many years ago from Tammy Cook-Searson. And so I wear it proudly, but unfortunately it was on another jacket. I wasn't smart enough to put it onto this one. So they mean a lot to me, and the one I received means a lot to me when I wear it.
On that note, be sure to wear your beaded poppy tomorrow as an alliance and just to show support. When Indigenous people see a non-Indigenous people wearing that, they may not smile, but inside they're saying, right on.
Oh, thank you for that. I appreciate it.